Welcome to my presentation for my class. I have 3 people here that are with me, actually 4th. I have my cameraman. Let me introduce you to my people. We have Sister Thomas, and Brother Thomas, and Brother Lee. And they're going to be watching the presentation with, again, my son Justin Lee is behind the camera. So I'm glad you guys are here. So let's get into this topic. The topic we're going to talk about is overcoming grief. It is a process. And so we're going to learn a little bit about grief in itself. So the first thing I have a quote here. What effect does grief have on someone when a family member or someone they love deeply? What effect does that? It hurts, doesn't it? It hurts. It's hard to control the emotions that take over the mind and the physical body. And so almost everyone probably has gone through the process. Who here has gone through a grief process? Raise your hand. Yeah, I see everyone in the audience has raised their hand, that we all have some kind of grief that does take place in our lives. Okay? This is a picture here of someone who has gone through a loss. A loss of a loved one is tragic and traumatic. And so as we're going through, we have all these emotions that come out, and we have these feelings that we have to deal with. So when dealing with grief, it's normal to eventually have to go through some kind of healing and acceptance. But if the grief is more intense for a longer time, then the feelings become more of a loss. They become more devastating, and we suffer from those unresolved and complicated grief. Okay. Why does grief happen? The loss of someone special brings a feeling of separation. So you're separated from that loved one, knowing that you won't be able to see them again. And so sometimes it's hard to accept that type of grief. Okay, adults with extreme reactions of unresolved grief have a lot of issues and emotions that they're dealing with. And here on this part, we can see that we'll have some reactions of grief here. As they pop up, see how many of these you may have in your life, or have had. Don't want to speak, don't acknowledge, disbelief, unable to accept the death, obsess, avoid dealing with the grief, have health anxieties. You might feel like the person died of some issue and you're afraid you'll have those kind of issues. Isolation, withdraw, deep sadness, depression, guilt, loss of identity, that the person has died, you don't have an identity anymore. You could have prevented the death, and maybe the last one is wish they could have died. These are all real emotions that people go through. You might not have gone through all of these, but I bet you went through a lot of these as you dealt with the death of a loved one. The feelings get bottled up inside, and then it makes it hard to let go of all those negative feelings that come in. I've seen many people who have had some, and maybe almost all of these types of feelings in their life. Can you relate to any of these types of grief? I see about everyone shaking their head, because these are real. Even if just one of those, it is real. Okay, why is grief important? It allows us to process our thoughts and the feelings that we have so that we can try to deal with them. Both positive and negative issues, as it tells us here, the feelings to deal with the loss. So we do have positive and negative coming into our life. Okay, I'm going to share a story with you about my life. And it was when we were first married. We were married 6 months and found out we were going to have a baby. We were so excited, and we started to get the room ready, much like this one, for our baby to come. And so my due date came and went. It was 3 weeks after my due date. I finally went into labor, so we took off and went to the hospital to deliver the baby. After several hours, our baby girl was born. After holding her for over an hour in our arms, and calling her parents to share our joy with our parents, they came in and took the baby back to the nursery so they could check her out. And they noticed at that point she was having some problems breathing. And they found out that one of her lungs was collapsed. And then they said that they didn't have a place to put her in the hospital that had the neonatal technology that they needed. So they called the other hospital in town, but they didn't have room either. So I thought, what are they going to do? Well, they said they had another hospital, but was 70 miles away. So they took an ambulance, as this shows, and they took her to the hospital 70 miles away. And as she left the hospital, I said my goodbye. And that hurt. My heart sunk. It sunk to be able to say goodbye. So the loss of a child brings different emotions of grief. You have emotions, but I felt like there were different emotions. I've had losing parents, I've lost children, and this was the worst part. They called us up after 30 hours in that other hospital that was 70 miles away, and they said they had lost her heart rate. And so within a little while later, they said they got it back. I mean, they'd got it back, lost it, got it back. And then a little while later, they called us and said, they called us and told us we had to come to the hospital. I won't go through all those details, but she ended up taking her last breath. And so I went through some of those reactions that we saw in that previous slide with all of them listed. I had so many things going through my mind. Could I have prevented it? What did I do? What was I going to do? All these emotions went through my mind. Here are the feelings that I had were very real. I started to think, what could I do now? I felt alone. Even though I had my husband, I still felt alone. And later we talked, he felt some of those same feelings that I had, that we wondered, what we were going to do. And we didn't know what to say. People avoided us. They didn't know what to say either. So I found this quote on the internet, and I thought it was pretty cool. So let's look at this quote. It said, "How a woman grieves." It says, when a woman loses her child, whether it be a baby who died or one who was 40 years old, a part of her dies as well. I can relate to that photo. I felt like part of me that went with her. Grieving a loved one, whether it's a child or an older person, is not easy. It really doesn't matter what age it is. We still have to go through the feelings of hopelessness, broken, or maybe you feel angry or confused. And whatever your experience, you're not alone. There's always someone there you can turn to and try to get yourself back on track, and especially God. God is still there loving everyone. I did feel God's love when I went through my grieving, but it was hard. I didn't know how to deal with other people. What do we need to have positive thoughts? Well, what we need to do is try to find something we can turn our life around, so we're not always going through with those heavy hearts, because that would keep you in despair all the time. I wanted to have positive thoughts. I wanted to find something that I could do, some action that would help me to overcome the feelings. So I decided maybe I should learn a new hobby or some kind of talent, something I could share or do. So I kept thinking, what can I do to help overcome these negative feelings? I always wanted to have a kiln. I had a sister-in-law who lived about 2 hours away, and she had her own kiln. And I always loved going to her house to paint things and create things that I could have. So I dreamed of owning my own kiln. And this is actually a picture of the kiln that I was able to buy. But when I would go up to my sister-in-law, she got me a plate. After she found out a kiln, she got me this plate, and I went up to her house and I took it home and I painted it. So I got out my paints and painted it, and I put this piece into my kiln. And when I pulled it out of the kiln, I could feel joy. I felt for the first time in my life something happy. It was almost like a rebirth. Every time I open up the kiln, I can see kind of new birth on things when they come out painted. They come out not always beautiful, but this one I thought did, my first plate. And this plate hangs in my kitchen today, that when I see it in my kitchen, it reminds me of how I went through a new birth process. After I bought the kiln, we went and bought some molds. This is how you make pieces that you can pull out the kiln, and you can paint them with glaze or stain, whatever you want to do. We actually, went on the internet and we found some molds, so we took a trip to Ohio. We had 2 vans and a small pickup truck that we drove to Ohio to get molds. And when I brought them home, the cars and trucks were hanging low. They're pretty heavy with all the new molds that I was able to. They weren't new molds, they were used, but to me, they were brand new. And that's a story for another time. So as I got involved in my new life, the healing process began. I was able to become part of something new. I was able to begin the process of feeling love again and feeling that passion that I can have. And so here's some of the talents that I have, that I've learned, techniques that I went and learned, and shared with others. So then I could become more out of that negative feeling by sharing with everybody else. So I learned that life can be changed from darkness to light, negative, positive, by putting yourself in a place that healing can begin. So I feel that my life changed. I still went through the negative grieving process, but I pulled positive back into my life, and I was able to see changes that occur. So I know as we overcome grief, it is a process, as I said from the beginning. So as we turn our things around, anything we go through, whether it's grief or any negative trials that we may go through too, may be part of this, that we can change our life. Thank you for participating in my presentation.